If you're not just looking to optimize for a cost per click to try to get great clicks in, which is not perfect because I can drive a ton of clicks with like a really engaging ad that has nothing to do with the company. So having great cost per click doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good cost per conversion too.
Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Data Unlocked podcast. In this podcast, we explore the ways in which data drives creativity and innovation for marketers, and we explore that with the best and brightest in the industry. My name is Jason Davis, founder and CEO of Simon Data, a growth platform driving smarter marketing for brands like JetBlue, TripAdvisor, Equinox, and Markbox. I'm excited to have our guest, Erik Huberman, on our podcast today. Thanks for joining us. Erik, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Hawke Media?
Sure. So started a company called Hawke Media about 8 years ago. We're basically an outsourced CMO and marketing team to companies. So going to brands, identify holes in their marketing strategy or org, and then can spin up different experts a la carte month to month. So a Facebook marketer, email marketer, web designer, fractional CMO, et cetera. We've got about 320 full-time people. We run marketing for about 600 brands currently, and just came out with a book called The Hawke Method, which is really our marketing methodology, one of the first prints. So yeah.
Great. And I assume for our listeners, you can buy the book on Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, Walmart, Target, anywhere. Books are sold, even our own site, hawkemethod.com, et cetera.
That's fantastic. So let's sort of dive into things, Erik. We spent some time the other day talking about some of the central challenges and opportunities around data. Ultimately, as an agency from your position, that really comes in and owns the strategy in addition to the execution. Data manifested in multiple ways, but really at the end of the day, the most powerful way of really enabling data in an organization is that of establishing a North Star. And today we just wanted to really talk around this topic of what is the proper North Star for today's brands who are looking to be fully customer-centric, and what does that look like? And I think within this, we'll be getting into what did things look like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 20 years ago for brands that were brick and mortar, brands that were focused on SEO, and really when you look at some of the best and brightest and most successful customers that you work with today, what does that process look like of establishing those key metrics and really how do they drive success?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, listen, there's a ton, but I would say, speaking to the North Star, the same numbers that have been true, I actually don't know when these came into play, but it's been decades and decades, is just your CAC to LTV ratio. So how much does it cost you to acquire a customer? And how much do you make in a lifetime value of that customer? That number is what every private equity firm is going to want to know if you're selling the company. That is definitely a North Star because it tells you, can you profitably grow your business and how much money do you make when you're acquiring customers? Like that, it's very rudimentary in some senses too, but if you want to simplify it into one number that matters, it's that number. And so, because that really will indicate, can you build something sustainably?
So Erik, maybe we can talk about some of the operational challenges within this, because look, if I'm a performance marketer and I go onto Facebook or to Google, and I spend $1,000 a day on ads, they're not going to show me these numbers.
No.
They're going to show me conversion rates, and they're going
not even that anymore. That's the issue. That's where we've actually hit so many problems the past year with Facebook, is because of the iOS changes. They used to show you accurate conversion rates, at least decently accurate, because they had a 28-day tracking window. And this, we talked about a little of this before, but the biggest metric that people miss is their purchase cycle. By far, the biggest metric that people don't talk about. Even when I have this conversation with people, then I circle back and go, do you guys know your purchase cycle? Oh yeah, we're still getting to that. And it's like the most critical number in your marketing. Purchase cycle, just to define it, is from the first time someone becomes aware you exist, whether it's an ad or word of mouth or whatever, to the time they buy. What is that time period? So that you can actually measure with that time period. If you don't have that time period, and I spend $10,000, or you said $1,000 a day on marketing. Well, if I go look at the results of it 2 days later, but my purchase cycle is a month, well, those results are going to look horrible. And so I'm going to go, oh, I guess Facebook doesn't work for me. Hear this all the time. And I'm going to turn it off and cut off my nose to spite my face because I have no idea what data I'm looking at. And so you have to incorporate that purchase cycle into how you're looking at it. And Facebook doesn't do a good job of tracking that, even that piece. It actually, all that Facebook can tell you right now is what's your cost per click. Sure, that's fine. Facebook currently has a 7-day tracking window for conversion. And in 7 days, we see for a $50 average order value in e-commerce, the average purchase cycle is 3 weeks. So already you're literally only seeing the first week of 3 for a half-life of your conversion rate. So that you're not getting the data there. but that's for $50. For $100, it's 5 weeks. For $200, it's 6 weeks, and it can go up to between 2 and 3 months for an impulse buy. And so if you're not measuring over that period of time, which there are a lot of tools like Glue and other tools that we use to do this, you're just looking at that first week performance. And if you're not just looking to optimize for a cost per click to try to get great clicks in, which is not perfect, because I can drive a ton of clicks with like a really engaging ad that has nothing to do with the company. So having great cost per click doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a good cost per conversion too. But assuming that that's really all you can optimize directly in the Facebook channel, as well as, I guess, early purchases. If you're going for quick purchases, you can, but I would say that that's probably a bad strategy, because getting people to buy quickly doesn't necessarily mean you're getting good customers. And again, if lifetime value is the North Star along with CAC, then if you need to drive in quality customers that are going to stick around, buy more, keep coming back, et cetera.
Got it. So maybe we can talk a bit about, really just, you spent the last few minutes talking about purchase cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So I click and I buy 3 weeks later on average.
Right.
But really, when you look at LTV, it's not just a matter of what I buy or if I
Right.
buy, but do I buy a second time and a third time, and do I buy in a continuous fashion? And even with even putting the iOS changes aside, that present really just operational challenges or technical challenges for Facebook or Google for that matter, there's still measurement gaps around actually computing this number, which you say is so foundational, yet it's still so hard to actually even get visibility into from today is the most popular ad bidding platforms on the market.
Yeah, and I would say it really is about, with most of these, it's art and science, meaning like it's not, getting it perfect is impossible. The way I would explain that is like attribution has been this hyped up thing in marketing forever. And the problem with attribution is it's not perfect. It's kind of like, it's a good way to understand, you want to understand how you're attributing, and attribution is usually defined as how are you attributing a sale to which marketing channels? Like how much did Facebook contribute to that versus email marketing versus Google? And the issue we deal with is if someone clicks a Facebook ad and then a Google ad and then buys through an email, how much of that do you attribute to Facebook, Google, or email? Like what would be your answer?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how it impacted the customer experience and what role it played in the purchase.
And my answer would be 100% of all of them, because it took all of those to convert a customer. And so people get into these models where it's like, well, let's say it's 33% Facebook, 33% Google, 33% email. It's arbitrary, frankly. And however you want to measure that to define how you're going to optimize is fine. But chasing that is where people get in trouble, because they make up their own definition of attribution. Every company does. Like there's no science to this piece. And this is what I mean by art versus science. They make up their own definition, and then they forget that they made up their own definition. So they start reading this as gospel, and they're like, well, it says that Facebook's only accounting for a third of our sales. It's like, that's because you plugged in that number. Like, just to be clear. And so when you're looking at all of these, it's figuring out how to get the data set up as good as possible. So back to the purchase cycle, you're not necessarily going to be able to track the first time everyone hears about your brand, because a lot of it's word of mouth, which is a whole nother data point we like to look at, K-factor. What's the viral coefficient? How many people are bringing other customers with them? And so that's an important one. You're not going to know that. So we start to track just what are those first points that you can track, like an email submission or a phone number submission to the company, the first time you collect data, or the first time they see an ad on Facebook. But again, that's even hard to track, because tracking that person, the first time they see an ad, you don't have them. The first time they click an ad, now they're on your site, you might be able to track them. But if cookies go away, this is where that gets also complicated. So it really becomes, when do you collect some first party data on the person to when they buy? And you know that that's under reporting, because you know that by the time they gave me an email address, they probably have seen us more than once, and that probably wasn't instant. Sometimes it's instant, but on average, it's not going to be instant. And so if it's not instant, you know that whatever number that is, let's say that says 2 weeks, you know that it's more than 2 weeks. Your purchase cycle is at least outside of that. And those are the kind of things that it's like, again, not perfect, but at least you have good indicators on what it can be. And you do have a great piece of data, which is, okay, so now on average, I know when I collect an email address or a phone number, it'll take that person 2 weeks to buy. And during that 2 weeks is really critical. So it's those kind of things you have to think through.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that as a top-level KPI, if you're just trying to gauge efficiency of the business, you can compute your CAC to LTV ratio without having to look at any attribution measures at all. You just look at how much money you're spending on top of funnel and paid in your marketing efforts. You divide that by the LTV across your customers. What becomes tricky is really then actually understanding what's moving the needle, what's effective and what's not.
Yep, exactly. And again, being one important part of running a business, marketing, is reading between the lines of data and like taking a step back and going, okay, so this is all the data points I have, but like, what does this actually mean? Because if you just read from data, I've watched it happen so many times where it's like people love to be data driven, and it's data driven, not data absolute, I guess is the point, where it's like, okay, so what does this mean? And there are so many times that I've looked at someone's data, I'm like, wait a second, this is wrong. Like this data is wrong. And I can tell you because these two don't add up. Like you have to, if you're not thinking about it, a good example of this actually, here's a data-driven decision for you. We were working with a company that all of a sudden overnight, their conversion or their daily revenue dropped 7/8. Like literally just fell off a cliff, just boom, and no one's buying their shit anymore. And they spent, and I didn't get pulled into this till a month into it. They were yelling at our Facebook team, Facebook ads are broken, you got to fix them, you got to fix them, you got to fix them. And I'm listening to that, and finally I get pulled in. And they're like, hey, we're trying to fix Facebook, but it's just, we're not getting the conversion anymore. I'm like, what's the cost per click on Facebook? And whatever it was, it's $1.30. What was it a month ago? $1.30. Okay. Did we change targeting? Not really. Did we change anything else? No. Okay. So we're hitting the same cohort of people that were converting great before. They're now not converting at all, basically. And the cost hasn't changed, but supposedly the cost to acquire customer has gone up 8x. Okay. Sounds like it's not Facebook. Facebook's numbers are all exactly the same. Let's go. How's their website? The website's the same. Is it? Let's go do a site audit on them. We ran a site audit. Turned out the site speed had dropped 3x. So all of a sudden it was taking people like 9 seconds to load each page on mobile. And so, yeah, they pulled up an ad, they clicked it like they always were. And then they were sitting there for 9 seconds looking at a blank screen and they were getting off. And so it was all site speed, but they went, oh, our CAC is wrong. Facebook. It's like, again, the data did say their CAC was screwed up. They tried to fix it in the wrong place. Nothing was wrong with that data decision, but how they read it.
Yeah, no, and site speed is, for anyone listening today, is, has a dedicated tab in Google Analytics.
Yeah,
exactly. It's funny. I reflect back. I always, having spent some time at Google over a decade ago, my thesis on Google's products is, obviously they're very much influenced by what Google does well, and also by their sort of self-interest relative to their advertising products.
Yeah.
But when I was at Google, and I'm sure it's the same today. Every 10th of a second, or even 50 milliseconds that they could shave off, or 10 milliseconds they could shave off of the response time for search would increase ad revenues and click rates materially. So, it's a great anecdote, and to your point, it's this is one of 30 things or more that can really sort of drive variability.
Yep. No, 100%. And that's the thing is it's learning all these different moving parts. I mean, that's literally what the book's about. Is like, let's start with a high level. Like, is it awareness, nurturing, or trust that you're screwing up? Like there's all sorts of data around, or data points to look at for that. And then you go down a level of like, which channels are we leveraging? What are we doing right? Whether it's site speed, whether it's email marketing, whether it's SMS, whether it's content, whether it's Facebook, Google, whatever it is, there's all different reasons that these can be, there's indicators for all of them. But I usually, like you did mention in the very beginning, start with the North Star and then break it down from there. Like, okay, is our CAC to LTV good? If it's good, then just scale. Like that's honestly, like people miss that part too, is like the numbers are good, go. Because it doesn't last forever either.
Yep, no, 100%. Maybe we can spend a few minutes as digging into some of the other views into metrics that drive customer centricity. And before we sort of get too deep in the weeds, Erik, you and I were talking a bit about some historical context here before the show. And I find it very interesting. I think our listeners will enjoy just hearing a bit of retrospective around, what did the world look like, 20 or 30 years ago around, KPIs and, and key business metrics. It's not as if, with the internet, came, metrics that people use to drive their businesses. But, really, if you look back to retail, either today or certainly, before e-commerce, one of the key metrics that folks used to drive their business was revenue per square foot.
Yeah.
So you're opening up a store. It's 3,000 square feet. Your rent is whatever, $20 a square foot. I need to make sure that you're making at least $150 a square foot. And that is really sort of the metric that you optimize for. So where does the inventory go? How do you make sure that the checkout lines are shortened up, such that you're actually getting the right flow, right volume and velocity of of purchases, and and this is an efficient. This is a very efficient metric if you're trying to make sure that your retail footprints are profitable and viable.
Yep. No, and yeah, and that is, I'd say that's still an important metric. I mean, I've still heard, Lululemon and Apple were, I think, have broken the records. I don't know which one's winning right now, but they were both doing the best per square foot. And if you look, like, Apple stores are hilarious in that sense, because like they're wide open and like they don't get like massive efficient use of their space. It's like the reason they do is because they put a display product out there and then everything else is in the back. And so they're able to make these open spaces, versus Lululemon more looks like a typical space. They just frankly have expensive stuff that people really want and seem to buy a lot of. So it's still an important metric. I mean, retail, like brick and mortar purchases pre-COVID, it was about 13% of consumer purchasing was online, 87% in store. That spiked to 30% during COVID. And now it's settled around, high 20s. So it hasn't subsided at all. People have gotten used to buying online, but the majority of purchases are still done in store. So, and the reason that metric is so important is the cost of a store is the store. It's the real estate and the staff and all that, but that's all the costs that you'd have either way. So you have to look at the real estate and then go, okay, how much money can I make off this real estate? Assuming most retail, if it's not direct to consumer, is functioning around 50% gross margins. So if 50% gross margins, we need to be at certain, revenue per square foot. And like looking at that as one of your North Stars to maximize how you build out your store is an important thing.
Yeah, I'd argue though with Apple, while certainly I'm sure they're looking at revenue per square foot as a KPI for their business, they're looking much more closely at customer LTV as a KPI for their business.
Totally.
One of the reasons why they're so efficient, and same with Lululemon, probably to a lesser extent. Obviously, Lululemon has a big digital footprint, but certainly not to the extent of Apple. But one reason why they're able to get that kind of efficiency is because they have such customer loyalty. The customers, as soon as they step foot in the store, have already spent thousands or tens of thousands of dollars with the brand over the last decade. Which is pretty unique relative to
Lego actually talks about this. Lego considers they have their own retail stores now, and they're not revenue generators. They track on customer satisfaction. Their employees apparently are instructed to give away free Legos and just make the brand better. And that's what they're there for. So you're right. Yeah. There's many other ways that they measure it, but I'm just looking. Apple had in 2017, it was $5,546 per square foot they were making in revenue in their stores. And there's no rent that comes close to that I know of.
No, 100%. And then I guess the other metric that maybe is sort of worth revisiting is there are if I look at sort of a lot of Web 1.0 brands that were effectively built in the back of Google. These brands really will look very heavily at return on ad spend, or more specifically, really just their conversion rate relative to organic search traffic. And while there may be some desire to be customer centric, I remember with I was at a conference for my last business was an ad tech product for retail. I met this guy who founded a business, gloves.com. And you ask a question like, why would you create a business called gloves.com? Like, is it to be customer centric because this is where I go for all my gloves needs? I was talking about his inventory. He sold ski gloves, he sold leather driving gloves, and he also sold like white gloves to play the bells, and whatever the church bell group are. Pretty diverse set of inventory, and really the reason why he created this business with this sort of somewhat unusual product lineup was because he just was able to arbitrage the Google search traffic. He got great SEO. He got a ton of traffic. Whenever anyone typed ski gloves or leather driving gloves, he'd be up there on the first page, and and he'd make his revenue. And a business like this, are they focusing much on LTV? He might track it, but he's a lot more concerned on what kind of placements he's getting on his SEO and his search traffic.
One, to that point, few things. One, relying on SEO for your entire business is, both know this, like it's devastating because Google changes their algorithm all the time and you're screwed.
Works until it doesn't.
And then you go out of business because you have no other backup plan. You haven't diversified. So like diversifying in marketing is critical. Like you have to treat it like a stock portfolio. If you go all in on one thing, you're probably going to fail at some point. A lot of people went all in on Facebook the past decade, and I know a lot of companies that are screwed the past year because they can't figure it out. That being said, I just went to gloves.com and he's pivoted to be more like nylon and latex gloves. So obviously the ski glove kind of market, it didn't work. Like it worked, maybe it worked temporarily, but we see this a lot with these types of businesses. When you don't build as you put it, a customer-centric business, yeah, he could do maybe at a period when he could get a bunch of free traffic, you can build a business around that. The moment that shifts, now you're scrambling to change your entire business model. You haven't built any real enterprise value that actually is sustainable in the business. Like the business is not that, it's not going to continue for the next decades, which you're putting in the work. Why not build a business that way? And you end up having to pivot into things like this. And the issue is with products like this, people might come back and buy them over and over again because it's latex and disposable. But if I go to a site and buy ski gloves, there's no reason I'm going to go back there to buy my mountain biking gloves. Like it's just, that's, again, when SEO works great, but then when that falls off, you're done. Versus if, let's say I'm selling ski gloves, sell other ski apparel, sell skis, sell everything that around skiing, sell lift tickets, like get as much share of my wallet as you can. Again, we're going back, like this isn't like a debate. And I do debate. I'm not talking about you, but in general, I debate this with clients sometimes where it's like, I'm not here to debate that lifetime value is an important metric. It is. You can run your business on it or not. You're just causing yourself more pain if you don't.
Yep. No, 100%. Great. And maybe, we can sort of touch on one more quick topic. I know we're sort of bumping up on time here, but we had talked the other day about some other sort of core drivers of LTV, in particular, how you think about going from first to second to third purchase, and and metrics around net dollar retention. Maybe you can talk about those for a few minutes, and and how and how our listeners might want to sort of orient to that.
Which metrics? Sorry, you broke up slightly.
Net dollar retention.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a number that's come up a lot more recently. The net dollar retention, how much money are you growing your customers once they come in with you? And that's, again, that's more subscription model. So it depends on your business, but a lot of SaaS companies are using this now. And it's when you get someone in, how much of that money are they growing or declining with you? Basically, are they finding ways to spend more money with you? And it goes back to how have you built your product or service, or that you can get an increase in spending over a period of time, because we're seeing really good SaaS companies have over 100% net dollar retention, meaning like we have one right now that is, I think, 283%. And the reason is companies sign up with them early and then grow with them. And so the average customer is growing almost 3x over the course of, they use a year. Over the course of a year, their average customer is actually spending 3 times as much as they came in spending because of their growth with the company and the way their platform is built to grow revenue as the company grows.
And for e-commerce brands as well, I mean, looking back at last year, you can look at the total revenue coming into the year from existing customers, and then look at everything they purchased over the year, and then compare that to the total volume of purchases for the broader business. That will get some indication around how much of sales and revenue are coming from existing customers, extending LTV, and versus how much is coming from net new.
That's a very important metric to look at too, because if you're getting all your business from your existing customers, it's a good sign because that means they're happy with you. It's a bad sign because over time your customers will churn. It's just by nature, like they will churn. And so if you're not doing enough to drive in new customers along with that retention and growth from existing customers, you're going to have issues at some point. And so it's actually a great, you might just look at your revenue and go, oh, our revenue's great. But if you're not doing those things to sort of fill the top of the funnel, you're going to end up in pain down the road. And so that's, again, another important metric to look at.
Great. Now we're definitely sort of at the top of our time here. But thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your wisdom with us. Really, when I sort of reflect on the conversation, and the opportunity around proper metric-driven development, it's really about, as I said, when we kicked it off, defining that North Star. If you're able to align the business around things that will ultimately define the brand and really enable your customers to orient to your business and your brand with true purpose, the results can be transformative. But for this to work, you need to start in a singular place. You need to have those right set of supporting metrics that ladder up across the entire customer life cycle, from acquisition downstream to engagement and continued retention, and everything needs to work in coordination in pursuit of a singular goal. So with that, Erik, maybe you can sort of talk a bit about to any of our listeners today who want to learn more about Hawke Media and what you guys do.
Yeah, I would say the book's probably the easiest way on Amazon and all those, so Hawke Method. And then feel free to reach out. It's just hawkemedia.com. We're happy to talk to anyone, look at their business. And then I'm on all socials at @Erik Huberman.
Great. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.